I arrive in Hollywood, Florida at my favorite WPT stop to travel to, the Seminole Hard Rock. Over 1,000 players are in town competing in the $3,500 championship event. It's one of the premier tournaments of the year. Players are battling for the first place prize of $662,000 and getting their name on the Mike Sexton Champions Cup, the best trophy in poker. I want it badly. After driving over 6 hours from Georgia, I'm tired, but I'm ready to fire, so I buy into the day 1A flight after dinner. There's only 4 hours left to play. I start with 50,000 in chips and have some catching up to do with blinds at 500 to 1,000. I don't make much headway, only getting the stack up to 57,000 on my second bullet, but it's still a success, being able to advance to day 2 since only about a third of the field makes it through. I'll have roughly 22 big blinds when we resume. It feels like a big win because I was down to 19,000 at the low point before slow playing aces to get a triple up during the last level. Also, I've earned a day off while many others play day 1B. There are a lot of cool unique features all over the property, which is partly why I enjoy being here so much. I even get a chance to go outside close to the pool and get a nice steak sandwich for lunch while I get a view of the Guitar Hotel. I wasn't planning to play any poker on my day off, but I can't help noticing there's a 100-200 game on Bravo. I don't get too many opportunities to play this high of stakes, so I'm curious to see what it looks like. The main issue is that I don't have much cash to play a game that large. I walk into the cash game section to scope it out and talk to the guys who organized the game. It turns out there's a seat open and they say I can take it if I'm interested. I buy in for 20,000, which is the minimum. We get our seat and start playing at 3:10 p.m. Most other guys at the table have between 40,000 and 100,000. I wish I had access to more cash to play comfortably. I have a little more on hand that I'll add if I need to, but I don't have enough to play my normal style of play. To make things even less comfortable, there are bomb pots every dealer change for $300 each, followed by a round of the Nick game for $500 per player, so if you lose, you have to pay out $3,500. Under these conditions, we can lose all our money extremely quickly. Coming into today, I'm on a 14-session cash game win streak, which is my personal best, but it's mostly been in 5-10 games. Today, we can easily wipe out everything I've won during that stretch if only 1 or 2 hands go poorly. We've only got 100 big blinds in front of us, with a lot of extra things going on to ramp up the variance. Let's hope it goes well. Right away, we pick up King 6 of Hearts on the button with the Nick game on. Onto the gun raises to 700. There are a couple of conflicting dynamics at play. We've got the Nick game on with a hefty tax for losing, so I want to get involved, especially with the suited king while we're in position. But since we basically had to scrape nickels from the bottom of a fountain on property in order to buy into the game, I'm not as inclined to play weaker starting hands, particularly early on in the session before I have my bearings. One last thing is that if you get a chance to play in a private high stakes game like this one, as someone from out of town, you're expected to give action. After weighing out the pros and cons, I make the call. Small blind calls, the big blind calls to close the action. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes Jack 10-7 rainbow. We've got nothing except regret for putting money in pre-flop. Checks to us. We're not going to try and bluff 3 opponents. I check back. The turn is the 6 of diamonds, giving us 4th pair. The small blind and big blind check. The initial pre-flop raiser bets 1,200. It feels fishy that he's betting the turn when a 6 comes out that almost definitely didn't help him, but it's hard to imagine that we're best when half the table has cards. I fold. We've got $700 less than we had a few minutes ago. The small blind calls. The big blind folds. It's down to heads up. The river is another 10. The small blind checks. Under the gun is concerned that his opponent may be strong. He checks back. Neither player wants to show their cards. The small blind eventually reveals that he has queen deuce of diamonds. He turned a diamond draw and bricked the river. It's not going to win it. Under the gun has ace 9. He had 1 over and a gut shot straight draw. I folded what would have been the winning hand, but we get some valuable information on the small blind, who's clearly playing an extremely wide range from out of position. Next, we're dealt pocket 5s in the small blind. The Nick game is on, as it basically is nearly every hand since a new one starts whenever there's a dealer change. There are just a few players left who need to win a hand. I'm still trying to mentally get settled since I've only been playing for about 15 minutes. There's always a lot going on when I'm trying to film a session because I have to get notes prepared and my bankroll app going, in addition to writing down the details of hands right after they happen. So I'm pretty perplexed when I see the cutoff raised to 1,200. I've never played with any of these guys before, so I'm not sure if this opponent just opens a 6x normally or what. It puts me in an awkward spot with pocket 5s. I don't like any options. I hate to have to fold a pocket pair, 3-betting over a massive raise isn't ideal, and calling when effective stack sizes aren't super deep while we're out of position isn't great either. Ultimately, I call to see a flop and hopefully win a hand to avoid having to pay the nick game tax. We're heads up, the flop comes Ace Queen 7 Rainbow. We've got 4th pair on a board that's going to be much better for the pre-flop raiser. I check. If the opponent breathes on this pot, I'm going to get out as quickly as possible. Instead, he checks back, giving us a chance to improve for free. The turn is another ace. It doesn't do much for us. I contemplate turning our hand into a bluff in order to steal the pot, but I think better of it in case we're up against a monster. I check again. The cutoff was nice to us on the previous street. That isn't the case now. The opponent grabs chips and bets 2,300. Is there some chance we're best here? Possibly, but we don't need to get out of line taking a stand. I fold. The opponent turns over Ace-8 offsuit. He turned trips. As the button's trying to exchange 6 purple $500 chips with me for 3 of my orange 1K chips, the table notifies me that I just lost the nick game and need to pay the other 6 players at the table $500 each. I had no idea it was down to heads up because I was in a whirlwind, getting set up to film the session, covering the highest stakes game that I've played all year. They also used the nip buttons the opposite way that I'm accustomed to, which made things even more confusing for me. Rather than everyone starting out with a nip button that they get rid of once they win a pot, players put a $2 chip in front of them once they win a pot. With a lot of things going on all at once and me having nerves, I was completely lost, not realizing the cutoff and I were the only 2 players left who hadn't won a hand. All of a sudden, our opponent's big pre-flop raise to 1,200 makes way more sense. Had I known that it was just 2 of us left, I probably would have 3-bet jammed pocket 5s, maybe the opponent would have called, and I'd have lost my first buy-in in an instant, or maybe I'd have won and could have avoided paying out an additional $3,000 to the table, which is a significant portion of what I just bought in for 16 minutes ago. I'm immediately stuck $6,000, which is the nightmare way to start the session. I add on for $15,000 more because I can't play the way that I want to with a stack of $14,000. This extra $15,000 is the last of my money. I'd have wired in tens of thousands more if I knew that there was a chance that I'd play in a game like this. As is, I'm going to have to make do with what I've got, which is a stack of $29,000. There's nothing left in the reserves. We're stuck, and we're stuck a lot. I'm beginning to get concerned that I won't even be able to make a full vlog if the session continues to go this way. A bit later, we're dealt Jack-8 offsuit in middle position during a 7-handed bomb pot. Everyone puts in $300 each, and we go straight to a flop. It comes Jack-10-4 Rainbow. We've got top pair with a weak kicker, 6 opponents, and a couple thousand in the middle. It's a perfect recipe for us to get in a lot of trouble. Checks to me, it's tough to ever feel comfortable with 1 pair in a bomb pot when there are so many other players that we have to beat, and so many ways that we could lose, but I can't let the other guys see a free card. I make a small bet of 600 to hopefully clear out some of the field. It folds to the small blind. I'm glad to see that. He somewhat nonchalantly calls. He's got over 100,000 in front of him and doesn't need to win this pot like we do. I get the sense that he doesn't have much of a hand, maybe a lower pair of some sort that he wants to see the turn with. The remaining players fold. It's down to heads up and we're in position, which is about the best outcome. The turn is the 3 of spades. Is it a brick? In an ordinary pot it would be, but maybe the small blind called our bet with Jack-3 offsuit, 10-3 suited, or 4-3 suited. In bomb pots, people can have anything. The opponent checks. I can't get too preoccupied with strange ways that we could have lost the lead. My read on the situation was that we had the best hand with top pair on the flop. It's unlikely that the 3 changed anything. It's not as if this is a massive pot for a 100-200 game, but this is an important one for us to win while we're playing with case money. I bet $2,000 in order to charge draws and worse 1-pair hands. The small blind folds immediately. Maybe he just had a gut shot straight draw or perhaps second or third pair. I show the jack. We get a very significant pot pushed towards us in order to settle the nerves and relieve some pressure. Remember, immediately after each bomb pot, the nick game begins. We don't want to lose one of those again and have to pay out several thousand more. The first hand of the nick game would pick up 10-8 suited under the gun. Generally, I'd fold from this position, but there's extra incentive to get involved at the moment, and most people aren't battling too hard the first hand of the nick game, so with a playable hand, I raise to 600, figuring it's a good opportunity to try to win. We're not often going to get 3-bet light when we open from early position at this point, whereas we might if it got down to heads up in the nick game, with everyone knowing that we'd have to open up our range. The small blind calls, the big blind calls as well. 3 of us are seeing the flop and we're in position, Here comes king 10 4 rainbow. We've got middle pair and a backdoor flush draw. Checks to us. We're going to connect on king high flops containing 2 Broadway cards pretty regularly when we open from under the gun. Plus, we have removal to 2 pair hands and sets. This situation is set up decently well for us to take this down with the C bet. I make a strong bet at 1200. We've got the nut advantage and the range advantage. There's not much hesitation from the small blind. He folds. The big blind takes a bit longer to contemplate his options. He ultimately folds as well. We have to turn our cards face up to avoid losing the nick game. It's nice to win 2 pots to recover some of what we lost. We're in for 35,000 total. Now we've got 31,500 in front of us as a new player enters the game.
We just started stand-up. That was the first hand of stand-up.
Yeah, you're gonna have to wait for a stand-up. Okay.
12 minutes later, the biggest all-in I've seen take place all year happens. The cutoff raises to 600. The button 3-bets to 2,500. He's one of 2 remaining players who needs to win a pot to avoid paying the nit tax. The big blind is the only other player remaining. The big blind isn't going to concede. He cold 4-bet shoves for 43,500 effective. The cutoff folds. The button snap calls. They agree to run it twice in a pot of almost $90,000. This game is no joke. The first flop comes out Jack 8-8, and the button likes seeing it.
That's you? Oh my god.
Looks like the button has half the pot locked up, although we still have no idea what either player's holding. The second flop comes Ace 9-8 rainbow. The turn is the 3 of spades. No one seems too happy. The river is the Queen of hearts. We finally find out what the big blind cold 4-bet ripped it with for over $40,000.
I got pocket 7s. Jacks full of 8s. Counter down.
The button scoops a gigantic pot of nearly 6 figures with pocket jiggities. A wise person once said, "There's no right way to play him," but the button does pretty well for himself. As interesting as it is to watch this much money exchange hands, the whole table's quiet because no one really wants to see that much bloodshed. When the nick game's on, the action can get completely insane. A lot of Phil Ivies may enter the comment section to chime in on how silly it is to 4-bet jam pocket 7s in that situation just to avoid paying out $3,000, but the player who did it is probably the best player in the game and is a complete crusher. The button had a huge incentive to 3-bet light. Cold calling a 3-bet and playing from out of position is something that good players avoid. The big blind opted instead to rip it and put tons of pressure on the 3-better. The button will regularly have to fold hands that are flipping with 7s, and even if the button has 8s or 9s, he'd have a really difficult decision. 100-200 isn't for the faint of heart, and the nick game takes it to an entirely different level. Here we're dealt ace-queen offsuit under the gun in a rare hand without the nick game going. I kick things off with a raise to 600. Winning this without any resistance would be fine with me. That's not what happens though. The big blind calls, which he'll be doing with a wide range. We're heads up in position. The flop comes 9-7 deuce, all clubs. We're not holding a club, so it's not particularly good for us. The big blind is going to defend pre-flop with a lot of suited hands. It wouldn't be shocking if the opponent already had a flush. He checks. With the flop containing all relatively low cards that don't really block our flopped flushes, we have the green light to bet small with our entire range. We can have all the ace-high flushes. We can have king 10, queen 10, jack 10 flushes. If the flop were ace 10-8 all clubs, it'd be a much different story and we wouldn't want to bluff as much because the only combos of flushes we'd have when we open from under the gun are basically king queen, king jack, and queen jack of clubs, maybe some king 9, queen 9, and jack 9 as well, but it would drastically reduce the amount of flushes we'd have. On this flop, it's a much better situation for us. I bet 300. It's an annoying spot for the opponent because he won't want to fold a lot of combos that could be drawing near dead. He calls, which he might do with all sorts of 1-pair hands. The turn is the 4 of clubs. There are now 4 to the flush on board for a suit that we don't have. The big blind checks. Another low club isn't bad for us to continue firing. The big blind shouldn't have a ton of ace-x offsuit hands containing the ace of clubs. We're going to fire a second barrel to keep the pressure on our opponent. I bet 1200. Even if the big blind has a flush that's, let's say, 10 high, he's not going to feel great about it. The opponent folds immediately. It's a fun bluff that we get through with complete air. The start of the session was as rocky as it could get, but now we're way more comfortable as we're inching our way out of the hole. We've got the nick game going on again with ace-6 suited under the gun. 4 of us are competing to win a hand in order to not have to pay out several thousand. I raise to 700. It's nice to pick up a playable starting hand with removal of combos that might 3-bet us. The cutoff is the only caller. He's already won a hand and doesn't need to fight as hard for the pot. We're heads up with someone who's not on the hook to potentially have to pay the nit tax. The flop comes queen 5-4 with 2 spades. We've got the flush draw with 1 over and a backdoor straight draw. Often, I'll check to the in-position player, but our hand is plenty strong enough to warrant a bet. We need to win. I bet 700 one more time into someone who has well over 150,000 in front of him, but he's not interested in sticking around.
Flop no pair, you gotta fold.
We have to show our hand, which is likely best, or at least has tons of outs. Taking this one down allows us to avoid losing the nit game, and we'll receive $500 from the last player to not win a pot. We're getting closer and closer to Profitville, but can't seem to win all that substantial of a pot to get over the hump. At least things are mostly going our way after the first 20 minutes of playing. We haven't lost any additional nit games. Speaking of which, we pick up ace deuce of diamonds in middle position when another one begins. We're in the cutoff. The player in middle position raises to 900. I've noticed that he's been opening a wide range and hasn't gotten too punished, at least until now. We have a solid image. I haven't been 3-betting much and haven't gotten caught pure bluffing at all. I 3-bet to 3,000. For a long time, we were playing 7-handed, but the table's filled up with 8 players. Losing the nit game will cost a total of 3,500. We're not going to be paying out this time because the middle position player folds. We get a light 3-bet through. We have to show what we won the hand with. The neighbor on our left likes seeing our move. In this one, we're dealt pocket queens in the cutoff. An interesting thing happened where a king was exposed pre-flop that would have been dealt to the hijack. Now the king will be a burn card. It may not have made that much of a difference, but in general it's good for us because it reduces the amount of overpairs that we might be up against and overcards that may come out. I raise to 600. The button snap calls. He's the one who called a pre-flop raise with queen deuce suited from the small blind in the first hand that we went over. We know that he likes to get in the mix and he could have almost anything. The big blind also calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It comes king 6-6 rainbow. We know one king is missing, but it's still hard to feel great seeing an overcard come out when we have 2 opponents and the board is paired. The big blind checks. I check to the button. He may not like the flop all that much. He checks back. It's a good sign for us that we're likely best. The turn is the deuce of spades. It's a total blank. The big blind might have a king or trips. He's at least going to rep one of those types of hands as he bets 1,100. There's absolutely no reason for us to let go of our cards after we check the flop, under-repping our hand. It's a little worrisome to see the big blind bet into 2 players and we still have one opponent behind us, but I call. The button perhaps picked up a flush draw. He calls. All 3 of us are still in. I'd like to see the queen of spades come out. The river is the 7 of clubs instead. The big blind didn't appreciate getting called in 2 spots on the turn. He checks. It's too dangerous for us to bet and try to get called by worse. I check. The button skips checking and goes straight to the reveal. He turns over ace deuce offsuit for bottom pair. The big blind is slow to reveal his cards, but he eventually shows 8 deuce offsuit. He made a speculative pre-flop call. We went over a $5,000 pot with our pocket queens. I feel fortunate that we're able to take this one down, but I don't quite realize just how fortunate we are. Remember that king that was exposed pre-flop that would have gone to the hijack if it hadn't flipped over? Well, it turns out that saved us from losing a ton of money.
You have kings?
Dude!
Queens.
You don't have kings?
He had queens, dude! No way! You would have gotten kings?
I had the king of hearts and the king of diamonds.
Oh my god.
King 6-6.
That is sick. The hijack is the same player who lost the pot of almost $90,000 with pocket sevens to pocket jiggities earlier. Everything is going against him today, but he's somehow managing to maintain a good attitude as he laughs about missing an opportunity to almost for sure stack me with pocket kings. After seeing him get it in for over 40,000 pre-flop with sevens, I don't see how I could have possibly folded pocket queens to him for around 30,000. We get a miracle exposed card that results in us winning the pot and nearly getting unstuck. We've climbed back from the early deficit to only be down 500 now. The very next hand we're dealt pocket kings in the hijack. Onto the gun +1 limps in. He's looking to get out of the nit game. He's the player who unfortunately, or fortunately for us, didn't get kings in the last hand. It's very bizarre that we happen to have them now. Maybe we can get the same flop. I raised to 800. The player on our left is always quick to get in the mix. He calls in the cutoff. I would have preferred that we played in position against just one opponent. The big blind calls for 600 more. Onto the gun +1 calls as well. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes ace-ace-10 with 2 spades. We don't even have the king of spades. It checks to us. It's It's too likely that someone has an ace. I check. The cutoff checks with no hesitation. We might be best after all. The turn is the 7 of hearts. It's a blank. The big blind probably doesn't have much. He checks for a second time. It's looking pretty wide open for the under the gun +1 player to take a shot. There's no reason to suspect that he's up against a monster. He wants to win a hand so that he doesn't have to pay out $3,500 to the table. He bets $2,000. I doubt that he has trips or better because he probably wouldn't have open limped pre-flop holding an ace. He could be value betting a 10 or semi-bluffing with a draw. I call. The cutoff breaks the record for fastest fold previously held by the legend Fast Fold Freddy. The big blind may not believe that we've got anything too good, or maybe he's got a monster. He grabs an assortment of chips before putting in the check raise to 7,000. Under the gun +1 gets caught making a move. He folds. I'm not thrilled about the situation that we found ourselves in. It was a decent spot for the big blind to check raise after a check through on the flop. Most people tend not to check again from out of position on the turn with a real hand, so this check raise looks incredibly suspect. The problem is that if my assessment is wrong and we're up against trips or better, I'm drawing nearly dead. Also, if I call and we lose an enormous 5-figure pot, going forward, I'm going to have to play with a much shorter stack that'll prevent me from playing a more comfortable style. Maybe we're up against pocket 7s, ace 10 or ace 7. Something feels funny, but I don't have a hand that's going to improve very often, and I haven't seen this opponent get out of line so far. I reluctantly fold to live another day. We were so close to being in the black, but kings don't work out, and we're stuck a few thousand again. When playing a premium hand like pocket kings doesn't get us the victory, there's only one solution, and that's playing more premiums. We're dealt ace-king offsuit in the hijack with the Nick game on. The player on our right really doesn't want to lose, so he raises to 1,500. It's a huge opening size that ordinarily forces people to have to make difficult decisions. Luckily for us, our decision is easy here. I 3-bet to 5,000. This play clears everyone out quickly, including the opponent who raised initially. He folds, then does the heavy lifting for us by grabbing his chips and mine, placing them on top of our stack. We're doing well to stay afloat, especially with how frequently we're playing the Nick game that's often been my nemesis, but we still haven't had that home run hand you dream of when playing the nosebleed stakes that sends a gigantic pot our way. I haven't lost hope that it's coming though. We're dealt pocket 8s in the small blind. We haven't hit any sets today, or really any particularly strong hands like 2-pair or better. I'm optimistic that'll change at some point. The hijack raises to 500. Calling or 3-betting are both reasonable options. I take the road with less variance this time as I call for 400 more. We're heads up out of position. The flop comes 8-6-5 rainbow. We've got top set. This is what we've been waiting for all day, my dudes. Let the opponent have an overpair one time. I check to him to set the trap. The problem is that when we call from the small blind, a lot of the time we're going to have low to medium pocket pairs that connect with this flop in one way or another. It isn't enticing for the opponent to c-bet if he missed. He disappointingly checks back. The turn is the deuce of spades. It's a blank. I would prefer to see an ace so that I could go for the check raise, but when this card comes out, if we check, the opponent is likely going to check again. We need to start building this pot. I bet 800 for value. I'd love it if the hijack chooses right now to get out of line. He thinks it over. I hope that he at least calls. It looks like he's contemplating doing something wild to get onto a Joe Francis video, but he realizes the camera is only for a YouTube poker vlog, and he determines it's not worth it. He folds. We make by far the best hand that we've made all day, but it doesn't do much for us. The opponent probably didn't even have a pair. We win a small pot, but we're still down on the day. Every minute at the table is pretty stressful and tense since we're playing for a lot of money, and one misstep could cause us to lose piles. In this one, we pick up pocket 6s with the Nick game going. We're in the cutoff. The player on our right is going to put a lot of pressure on the players behind him, including us. He raises to 1,500. I'm not in love with any option. Folding is too nitty. Calling allows players behind us an opportunity to 3-bet squeeze. If we 3-bet, we give ourselves a chance to win the pot right now, or we possibly isolate the hijack and play the hand in position. We could be best at the moment, but we don't necessarily want to go multi-way. The last time we 3-bet over the opponent's $1,500 raise, we got a snap fold. Our image is still good. It seems like re-raising is the best route to take. I 3-bet to 4,500. It'd be great to get the snap fold again. Effective stack sizes aren't going to be big in relation to the pot if we get called. If we get 4-bet jammed on, we're going to have to fold, lighting nearly $5,000 on fire. The hijack calls for 3,000 more, indicating that he's got a hand with some playability, whether it's a pocket pair, suited connectors, or suited Broadway cards, we don't know. What we do know is that the pot is over $9,000. Can we hit sets and back-to-back opportunities? The flop comes 7-3 deuce rainbow. We don't improve, but we've got second pair that could be good if our opponent only has 2 overs with a hand like ace queen or jack 10 suited. The hijack checks. He won't be folding anything better than a pair of 6s, so I try to target his high card hands, and I don't need to bet too much to make those types of holdings indifferent to calling or folding. I down bet to 2,500. We can maybe win it right now, or at worst, we retain control of the pot, making it easier to play the hand down the line. I expect the hijack to mix between folding and calling high card hands. This time he calls, which I didn't want to see. He could have a higher pocket pair, or maybe he doesn't have a pair yet and wants to see if he can connect with the turn. The dealer puts out the 10 of diamonds. I was hoping not to see any Broadway cards come out. The hijack checks. We're still beating hands like ace queen, ace jack, king queen, and king jack suited the opponent might have called our flop bet with if he had a backdoor flush draw. But getting to showdown cheaply from this point is the goal because we do have a sliver of showdown value. I check back to get to the river. The dealer puts out the 8 of spades. It's not the worst card in the deck. It's just tough for us to feel good about our 4th pair. The hijack checks. I don't see any huge need to turn our hand into a bluff. The fact that the opponent checked, rather than take a stab as a bluff, has me concerned that he has a hand that he's fine getting to showdown with something that beats us though. He probably has a pair of some sort, but I'm done putting money into the pot. We don't want to bet and get raised. I check back, knowing it's likely that this pot of over $14,000 is going to go the other way, especially when we hear the opponent say,
Pair.
I hate hearing that because the hijack isn't going to have a pair of 3s or deuces very often after calling our 3-bet pre-flop. I've lost hope. We're about to be buried. Then the opponent shows pocket 5s. I'm elated. We reveal that we've got him notched in a huge pot. Not only do we win everything in the middle, this win pushes us over the even mark for the very first time today. We were buried right away. Now the comeback is complete. We're not up much, particularly for this game, but we've got $2,000 in profit at the moment. It feels amazing to get out of the hole that we were in from the start and potentially extend our cash game win streak to 15 sessions in a row. It's not over though. We're playing another bomb pot that's 7-handed. We've got Jack 5 offsuit in the big blind, aka Motown. We go straight to the flop. It comes Jack 10-10. We've got a decent hand, but with 6 opponents, one of them could have a 10, a better Jack, or an overpair. Everyone checks. The turn is the 10 of spades, giving us a full house. It's a lot less likely that someone has quads now, and we don't need to worry about our kicker problems. That's more of a concern for the Jets. Small blind checks. I throw a grape $500 chip out there for value. The under the gun player on our left, who historically is not a folder, makes the call despite having 5 opponents behind him. Normally I'd be alarmed at the call, but I've seen this guy make some questionable light calls previously, so I may continue going for value if the river's a blank. Everyone else folds. It's down to heads up. The river is the 4 of spades. It's possible that under the gun called with a smaller pocket pair. I wouldn't be shocked if he called with even worse than that, to be honest. I bet $2,000 for value. The opponent shows just how sticky he is. He folds, showing the ace of hearts, which is apparently his good card. We get the bomb pot victory. 16 minutes in, we were down $6,000. We've won nearly $10,000 since then. We're up $3,500 on the day, with almost $40,000 in front of us. The game gets a bit tougher with some of the not so strong players picking up and being replaced by more formidable opponents. I had fun taking my shot, but I lose a little back and don't want to get stuck again. Plus, I have day 2 of the championship event tomorrow. It's time to rack up a small win for this game. I returned for day 2 of the tournament with 22 big blinds and a lot of work to do if we want to make the money. Remember, we bagged $57,000, which is barely more than starting stack, so we're towards the bottom of the chip count list. 485 of us are left. The top 180 make the money. I'm not feeling too hopeful that we're going to win that top prize of $662,000, but as long as we've got chips, I'm not going to give up. Nothing goes our way the first few hours as we struggle to stay afloat, getting down to $15,000. We're running on fumes with just under 4 big blinds. We pick up pocket 7s in the hijack and have an easy decision to rip it. The button calls with ace-8 offsuit. We're all in and at risk. The flop comes 10-5-4 rainbow. It's safe for now. The turn is the 9 of diamonds. We only need to survive one more card. The river is the 6 of hearts, we get the win and a much needed double up. Doesn't hurt the button stack at all, but we managed to hang on a little longer. We'll have to get a few more hands like that if we want a shot at making a deep run though. The next level, we get an opportunity with Ace-Jack offsuit. I open rip it for 45,000 from under the gun +1. It's a shove for 9 big blinds. Under the gun +2 immediately calls, which is terrifying. 2014 main event champion Martin Jacobson 3-bets to 100,000 from the button to isolate me. Under the gun +2 folds. We have a great chance to more than triple up as Martin shows pocket 10s. We're a slight dog heading into the flop. The dealer puts out Ace-Jack 3 with 2 clubs. We drill top 2 pair and take the commanding lead. We don't even need to worry about the backdoor flush draw since Martin isn't holding the 10 of clubs. The turn is the 8 of spades. We're 1 card away from having a real stack to play with. The river is the 4 of diamonds sealing it for us.
Triple.
Nice one.
It would have been easy to give up when I was down to 15,000, but I stayed patient to look for good spots to get it in. It only took a few hands to go our way, and now everything has changed. With this win, we've got about 30 big blinds as we move closer and closer to the money bubble, but I'm still not satisfied. Our stack climbs over 400,000 going into dinner break. We've got nearly 30 times what we had at the low point, and we're only 9 away from making the money. Shortly after dinner, the money bubble bursts. We achieve something that was improbable to start the day. Our stack dips a bit, but we're still in good shape to potentially get a big score. Towards the end of the night, we run into a nightmare situation, getting it in with pocket kings against pocket aces for 19 big blinds effective. The opponent with aces has us covered. We're in terrible shape. We're going to need to hit a set or we're out. Pretty much every great tournament run requires some luck at one point or another. We need a lot right now. The flop comes Ace Queen 3 Rainbow. We're almost immediately dead unless we hit runner. The turn king isn't exactly what I wanted to see. We improved to set under set, but it turns out even a set may not be enough. We've got only 1 out.
Wow, that's so sick.
What the fuck?
Oh, Jesus. Good luck,
Yeah,
guys.
on 7.
What was shaping up to be an incredible comeback run ends abruptly as we get massively coolered. Still, it's not a bad outcome to get 119th place out of over 1,400 entrants. We come up short of the final table and the gigantic payouts, but it's a profitable trip overall, and each experience like this builds upon itself to help us down the line for future tournaments when we're playing for a lot of money. We'll have to wait a little longer to get our name on the Mike Sexton Champions Cup, but rest assured that going forward, I'll be doing everything I can to make that happen.